Namaste. We all go through a midlife crisis, and it's not easy. A host of psychological and psychosomatic sicknesses start around this time, and this crisis often lead to separation and divorce as well. A midlife crisis is also an opportunity to give you a new direction to life. And to discuss this, we have with us psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vai. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So now, what exactly is midlife crisis?
As the word suggests, it is crisis and it happens in the midlife. By midlife, uh, today we mean the age group of 42 to 45, to be very precise. Some people call it 40 to 45. Some people have it early, 38 to 42. But to be most precise, it usually is 42 to 45. In this age group, certain biological and psychological events happen, which are very, very important. And these events generally, for most people, constitute a crisis. For a few, they may not constitute a crisis, but for most, it constitutes a crisis. The crisis has two parts, the biological part and the psychological part. The biological part is largely hormonal, largely genetic. That the human body is hardwired in a way that certain hormonal changes take place in this particular period. So women undergo a menopause and men also correspondingly undergo a hormonal change. The age clock also starts ticking and the strength of the body starts deteriorating after this age. Sicknesses which are latent come up after this age. These are the biological aspects of the midlife crisis. The hormonal change, the genetic change, the weakening of the body, the rise of diseases which come up because the immune system now starts going down. All of this constitutes the biological aspect of the crisis. But more important is the psychological aspect of the crisis. And when generally we say midlife crisis, we refer generally to the psychological aspect of this crisis. And the psychological aspect of midlife crisis is this. First, midlife crisis, it unsettles you and it sort of disturbs the equilibrium which was in the body and the mind for many years. Almost 10 to 15 years, there was a kind of equilibrium, and that equilibrium is now disturbed. So in one sense, it is a very unsettling feeling because of a long stable equilibrium in the body and mind being disturbed. Second, one starts feeling low, one starts feeling irritated, agitated, slightly depressed, slightly gloomy, and slightly hopeless. This is the second aspect of the midlife crisis. The midlife crisis also is like a closing of what started at puberty. So we see in the human psychological evolution across the life, three very important points. These are, so to say, the turning points. The mind takes three turns. It takes many turns, but these three turns are very major turns. The first turn happens after the Oedipus crisis, when the latency period sets in. So at 5 to 7 years of age, the first turn happens and the mind turns away from the deeply moving psychological problems and focusing now onto the body. And everything is put under a lid into what we call the latency period. So the turbulent turmoil of the early infantile years is suddenly put a lid on and mind takes a turn towards the body. The second turn happens at puberty, where the energies rise, the hormonal changes rise, and our youth starts. So there are the hormonal biological changes, the strength goes up, our looks start getting better, we start looking aesthetically better, more energetic, more ambitious, and so on. So our youth starts with puberty. So puberty is the second turning point. And what starts at puberty ends at midlife crisis. So that is the third turn, right? That we take a different turn, the body and the mind both take a different turn, and it is almost like the official ending of our young age. And it's very biological, very concrete. It is not just a notion in the mind, an idea in the mind. It's very concrete. So it almost appears as though there is a beginning of our youth in puberty. And this is like a second psychological puberty, although it is the end of physical puberty. And it's the end of the youth. And because of these profound changes, there is a very big difference in the element of hope. And this is very important. That hope is a very important element in human mind. Even if you have not succeeded in something, but you have hope of success, it keeps you alive and energetic. It keeps you positive and happy. But the moment hope dies, half of the man dies, and a sort of resignation, disappointment, and gloominess, and some sort of mild depression sets in. A sort of pessimism sets in. And these are the characteristics of the midlife crisis in general, generic to everybody, that there is a vanishing of hope. If not the death of hope, at least a significant reduction in the strength of hope. And this brings in a very deep sense of frustration, disappointment, resignation, and some degree of hopelessness, leading to some sort of anger, irritation, pain, some sort of mild depression, which in turn leads to some psychosomatic sicknesses or uh, difficulty in social relationships or occupational performance or occupational atmosphere, and some sort of reduction in personal well-being. All this put together constitutes what we call a midlife crisis. And it's a very profoundly moving event in the life of an individual.
And is it universal?
Yes, it is universal. It applies both to men and women equally, and it applies to married people as well as singles, those who are single. It applies to everyone. The nature, depth, and flavor may change, but in a generic sense, the phenomena is a human phenomena, universally applicable.
So, what are the features of this crisis, if we may say?
The first feature is the biological feature. There are hormonal changes. So women may experience the ending of the cycles, or some hormonal changes, or maybe growth, extra growth of hair or something of that sort. Both men and women experience a general reduction in the strength, a general reduction in the immunity, a general reduction in optimism, a general reduction in happiness and positivity, and some sort of gloom setting in. A general loss of positivity, optimism, and hope, and hope is very, very common. Uh, what happens is mortality becomes a fact. Till midlife crisis, we only have a concept of death in the mind, and we use our defenses to deny that concept. So death is not a reality. Secretly, we believe that somehow we are immortal, we are there forever. But once midlife comes, and most of the times we see our parents growing old, or our parents dying, or one of the parents dying, somehow the condition of our parents and the condition of our body and mind makes us realize the reality of mortality and the reality of old age. And this reality of death and old age sets off a completely different chain of events in the mind. We now see life as a sand glass. The sand is flowing out and we can do nothing about it. The looks are fading away. The body is weakening. The dreams that we once had are weakening. We no longer even dare to dream some of those dreams. And there is an acceptance of defeat and giving up on many of the desires and goals we had. And we start accepting the inevitability of life. We start accepting the natural frustrations of our existence. And this is a profoundly moving and extremely painful event in our life. And all this constitutes the features of midlife crisis. Exceptions are those who are very successful or have been able to fulfill all their dreams or most of their dreams, or at least the most central of their dreams. They may not pass through this cycle of frustration, anger, irritation, hopelessness, pain, and depression. They may look forward to, they may pass through the biological changes, but psychologically they look forward very positively to the rest of their lives, and they still are young at heart. The youthfulness of the heart has not been assassinated by the frustrations of life. But for most people, the youthfulness has been assassinated, hope has been significantly injured, and therefore most people feel a very frustrating, disappointing, pessimistic, and a gloomy midlife crisis.
Those would be very I mean, there are only few exceptions, right, who don't actually go through midlife.
The psychological difficult part of the crisis. And
yes, because our expectation and greed is boundaryless. There is no limit to it. So, if you fulfill one desire or one goal, you see, you always have a second staring at you. So
that is one aspect of the story. And the second aspect of the story is that we all start off at the age of 25 with very big goals. We may want to become a president or a prime minister, but very soon we realize that we are struggling to get a job of an assistant manager.
Even at 55?
Yeah, so what happens is we start off with dreams at 25.
25.
At 45, very few of us actually have reached where they wanted to.
Right.
So in a class of MBA students, if there are 40 people, 4 people will become vice presidents and CEOs, 10 to 15%, 75% of people will not reach those positions. And that is true for every class. And that is true for society in general, that 85% of people will fulfill their goals and 75 to 85% will not fulfill their goals. So what they started off at 25 as goals towards and what they ended up at 45 is very different. So the deep frustration is a reality of life for 75 to 85% of people. So what they wanted to become and what they have ended up with where they wanted, how they wanted to live, and where life has brought them to, what they wanted to experience, and what they were made to experience are very different things. So what
And
we
how does
yeah,
sorry, you were saying something.
I was saying,
Sorry.
I was saying what we wanted to experience and what we had dreams of and what life dished out to us are very different things. And they become
Absolutely.
this difference between our dreams and reality. This difference that becomes the ingredient for preparing the dish of midlife crisis.
Correct. And so how does psychoanalysis engage with it, the midlife crisis?
Psychoanalysis in general looks at midlife crisis as a difficulty of reality acceptance. That you started off with some dreams, with some narcissism, with some sense of entitlement, some sense of fantasy, and reality dished out something to you, and you realize your capabilities also were much less than what you thought they were, and challenges were far more than what you thought they should be, and therefore uh, much of your desires are not met. Not only that, in fact, you went through many of the experiences uh, which were so difficult that you never, in the worst nightmares, thought you should undergo those experiences. However, they did come true and you experienced them. So all of this creates huge amount of frustration, pain, and anger. And therefore, apart from reality acceptance, it is a challenge of uh, mourning and catharsis. So in general, psychoanalysis looks at it as a challenge of a therapy challenge and a personal challenge of reality acceptance, mourning, and catharsis. Some psychoanalysts have a particular opinion on this very specifically. Uh, for Freud, the key challenge was acceptance of the anxiety of death. The anxiety of death and the anxiety of pain, apart from reality acceptance, mourning, and catharsis, these were the challenges of the midlife crisis. For Jung, it was very different. Jung looked at it very positively. So Jung said the midlife crisis actually is an opportunity to discover some parts of yourself which were not on the surface when you were young. And therefore, there are two innings of life, like a cricket match. You have the first innings and the second innings. And the midlife crisis is the midpoint between the two. And Jung called it the stroke of the noon. The stroke of the noon. So the stroke of the noon, the analogy he gave is this. He said, the sun rises, goes to the top, and then starts going down. When the sun is exactly at the top, this is the noon. And the stroke of the noon has two parts of life. On the one side, you have the child and the youth. On the other side, you have the maturity and the old age. So on the other side of midlife crisis lies maturity and old age. And on this side of the midlife crisis, pre-midlife crisis, you have the childhood and the youth. And post-midlife crisis, you have maturity and old age. And they are as important as the childhood and the youth. So on both sides of the midlife crisis, there is life which is equally important. It is not that life ends with midlife crisis and then you just drag on. That is not the case. Jung says maturity and old age are as important as childhood and the youth. Before midlife crisis and after puberty and before midlife crisis, the whole life is about the life of senses, ego, and ambition. It is about personal acquisition and personal collection. It is about money making, power and fame. It is about sexuality and sense pleasures. After midlife crisis is the life of culture, of social work, of spiritual exploration, of religious and philosophical exploration, of scientific investigations, creation of knowledge, guiding the next generation, bringing up the next generation, training the next generation, and so on. So it is as purposeful as the pre-midlife crisis, but the focus of life is different. And we see that very naturally also, that we start looking after midlife more at social work, more at contribution to culture, more at intellectual, artistic, and scientific and spiritual life, and less on the life of the body and of the ego. So this is how Jung looked at it. Erik Erikson looked at it in a very different way. So Erik Erikson has his own model of life of 14 stages, and after midlife, he has very distinctly uh, named stages of how development of the individual continues, and he has his own take of how the development should continue. In effect, it is not very different. He also says it has to do with uh, social work, self-actualization, inner exploration, and so on. So he has his own take on the post-midlife and the midlife part of one's life. So this is the way broadly psychoanalysis looks at midlife, and Jung and Erik Erikson look at midlife not only as challenge but really as an opportunity.
Absolutely. I think it's the consolidation phase where you kind of go within. And but I think the point that you mentioned of giving back to society is really it's a very important point, right?
True.
It's like a payback.
Yeah,
It's like a payback time.
payback, I think, is very natural. If one
It's
is
natural.
in touch with oneself, these things naturally come up. It's not that you pretend them to be there.
Absolutely, yes. So I'm just wondering, would it have any effects on our dreams?
Yes, the midlife crisis, when it is on, brings to many people very gloomy dreams about losing parents or near ones or one's own death and mortality. Often the dreams are about mourning, about frustration of all that has happened or all that has not happened. So the frustrations of life, the inabilities, the incapabilities, the non-achievements of life, they come up in dreams. Third, there are dreams of mourning, dreams of guilt, and dreams of forgiveness. Asking for forgiveness or letting go people and forgiving people. Third category of dreams. Fourth category is about spirituality and saving oneself, saving one's soul. Very common in spiritually inclined people. Fifth is about doing something to make oneself socially immortal. Because one realizes biologically we cannot be immortal. So to make them socially immortal, what to do? How to stay in the memory of people forever. So these are the categories of dreams which are very normal while this process is on. There is another element very interesting which related to dreams. Uh, Certain dreams which were very dear to us once, which we used to repeatedly see and enjoy and spend a lot of time with, at times also be lucid in those dreams. Those reoccurring pleasant dreams, after a point in time, were too painful because of the frustrations of life, and we stop seeing them. And we reach a situation where we say, I dare not dream again those dreams. And then those dreams don't reoccur for many years. Some of these dreams, they start reoccurring partly or fully, mostly partly, during the midlife crisis or after the midlife crisis. So some of the dreams which we did not dare to dream again, they become active again, sort of requesting us to pay attention to them, work on them, and in a therapeutic way heal them or assimilate and integrate them. And some of the dreams which are very common, which we used to remember, they shift to the category of I dare not dream again, and they start getting repressed. So these are some of the very interesting elements related to dreams that are related to midlife crisis. And one important element is, in general, the frequency and intensity of dreams usually goes down. One has had too much of dose of reality to really entertain dreams. So that element also is there, connecting dreams, the dream element of the psyche, with the midlife crisis. From a Jungian point of view, the archetypal dreams of the old wise man and the archetypal dreams of healer and the teacher, they go up in frequency and intensity. And the dreams related to the hero archetype in the form of a youthful, energetic, and a warrior hero, those dreams, or the prince hero, those dreams in frequency and intensity usually go down. Some people find it very difficult to negotiate this part, especially those who have personality disorders or in particular narcissistic personality disorder.
How can how can one best manage this crisis and look at it as an opportunity and not as a crisis?
It's very important to know how to manage this midlife crisis. And there are two components. The biological component needs the medical management and diet management and exercise and the complete lifestyle management aspect. That's the biological aspect of midlife crisis management. Then there is the psychological management that we are focusing upon. And there are many elements which have to be managed. The first is reality acceptance. That 80-85% of people in this world cannot achieve the goals with which they start their young age. Both on the professional and personal front, we get far more than what we wish for, and this is a universal human condition. And therefore, we have to sort of recalibrate our desires, our sense of entitlement, our expectations, and sort of accept the inevitability of life. This is one part. The second part pertains to the whole idea of revisit, mourning, and catharsis. Because even if we intellectually accept that what has happened to us is something that happens to everyone by and large, except for a few exceptions. Even if we intellectually accept it, the inevitability of life, the reality as it is, even then, the feelings of frustration, anger, fear, pain, mourning is very, very necessary. The mourning is very necessary. Because those feelings are there, even if you intellectually accept the inevitability, the feelings are still there. And they have to be catharted out, and it cannot be done without revisiting your whole life. So either with a spiritual guru or with a therapist, it is better to revisit one's whole life. And in that revisit, it is very necessary to go for therapy, because this kind of a revisit, without a revisit to our entire life, it is very difficult to see where satisfaction and frustration is located. And then to bring up those feelings, mourn them, and be free from them. This process is neither easy uh, in the process sense of the term, and even more difficult when it comes to feeling those feelings which we deeply would like to avoid, at least one part of us would like to avoid. And this is where the presence of the other is very important. Midlife crisis is something which is very difficult to resolve all by oneself. Very few people can do it. Most people need the other in the form of a teacher, trainer, coach, spiritual guru, or most commonly the therapist. My personal preference is for a combination of a therapist and a spiritual guru. And because both of them have something to contribute. Psychoanalytic psychotherapy, psychotherapy in general, and spirituality, all of them have to contribute something in this resolution of this very important point of a midlife crisis, and how to convert it into the best of opportunities, because people who successfully come out of it, many times the best part of their life is actually post midlife crisis. So it is not that when the midlife crisis comes, you tell yourself the best is over and what is now left is the rest. It is not the best and the rest and the midlife in between. The best may be after the midlife. So it is not that it is the point of junction of despondency. It is not a junction of despondency. It definitely is a junction of despondency from a biological standpoint, but not from psychological, social, intellectual, artistic, or spiritual standpoint. So the best may actually be yet to come, not as a motivational pep talk, but as a reality of life. And we have not hundreds, but thousands and millions of examples where the best of the people's lives, both inner and outer, came after midlife. So to handle the midlife crisis, first is we have to recognize that it's a profound crisis. It is not something we can just walk through. It calls for attention. It calls for engagement. It calls for investment of time, energy, everything. And we have to tackle it as a very important part of our life, very important event of our life. One. So recognition of the significance of the event is one. Two, preferably take the help of a spiritual person and a therapist. Three, go with it positively so that uh, you can come out of this midlife crisis in a very productive way. And the second innings of life, what the youth say, the stroke of the noon, after the stroke of the noon is much better than before the stroke of the noon. And if that happens, then when the end comes, you die a very satisfied and, if lucky, a fulfilled person. Fourth, uh, individual successful coming out of a midlife crisis is good not only for him and his family, but also for society. So successful management of a midlife crisis is actually a social effect. A person who has come out of it successfully does thousand things in the second part of his life, which without the crisis possibly would not have done. And lastly, uh, this crisis brings out the wideness and the integrity of life, the integral nature of life, the different components of life. And therefore, one has to attend to holistic healing, the artistic element of life, the spiritual element of life, the intellectual element of life, and all this area, all these planes of life, the aspects of life, the biological, the emotional, the intellectual, the artistic, the social, the spiritual, all these aspects of life have to be integrally engaged with, planned out, attended to, lived out, and that is something which is a very rich and synthetic vision and a very, in a way, delicious and juicy integral taste of life.
So lastly, how does what does spirituality have to offer in managing midlife crisis?
Spirituality is a very important element of human life, and spirituality as an area has quite something to offer in managing the midlife crisis, just as it offers something to manage every part of life. Spirituality brings a very important element. The first is of positivity. Spirituality brings in positivity and meaning to life. One of the elements of the midlife crisis is the existential element of absurdity and meaninglessness. Spirituality brings to us the fact that life is meaningful, and whatever has happened, it may look insignificant, but it is significant. So the first thing spirituality brings is positivity. Second thing it brings is hope, that there is some goodness in existence. There are some good forces. There is something called goodness, maybe in the form of God or force of nature, but there is goodness in existence. There is purpose to everything. There is a meaningfulness, and there is significance of the seemingly insignificant. And when we realize that what we see as our failure, what we see as frustration and defeat, also has some significance to it. When we see that nature could have made us in a way that we grow up, we just be young, and then we die. Nature has not made us like that. Nature has purposefully invested time and energy in our post midlife crisis, maturity, and old age. There must be some purpose to it. So there is an evolutionary and natural purpose to our post midlife existence, just as it is purposeful for us. So there is an individual significance, there is a social significance, and there is an evolutionary significance of the post midlife crisis life that we have. Spirituality also allows us, not only allows us, it provides us with tools, tools of meditation, tools of observation, tools of energy healing, like Reiki and pranic healing, tools of visualization, tools of what we call avishkar, or almost like a psychodrama, tools of alchemy, tools of using herbs, tools of various meditative practices. Spirituality offers us a basket full of tools to help us overcome the revisit, not overcome, but do successfully the revisit, the mourning, the catharsis. A basket full of tools to successfully do that, and a complete philosophical framework to inculcate a positivity, meaningfulness, and significance in us, and to look forward not only to the post midlife crisis life in this incarnation, but also to coming incarnations, and the purposefulness of this whole existence, and positivity and this bliss and ecstasy which far exceeds the difficulty and pain in existence at large. So spirituality in that sense provides us with happiness, positivity, and a basket full of tools to navigate through midlife crisis and provide purpose and energy to the post midlife crisis life we have.
Absolutely, yes. Well, we have discussed today an interesting and a universal concern of midlife crisis, and we've even learned how to manage midlife crisis. And I think it is very important to not just midlife crisis. You know, it is very important that when a crisis come, it is we need to manage it. You know, instead of to it, it is very important that we learn how to manage it. And more importantly is that remember there's always help available. You just need to seek help. And you can even write to us. You know, we are there, and you can write to us, you can talk to us, you can mail us at hvindia@gmail.com. And till we meet next time, take care and thank you. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.